안녕하십니까. 제 이 연설은 한국말 잘 못해서 이 연설을 영어로 하겠습니다. 죄송합니다. So I'm going to speak in English. 기계 필요하시면 그냥 기계 쓰세요. I'm going to speak in English with a British accent. So for Americans, there's I don't know what number it is, but I'd like to start with a little bit of philosophy, if that's the right word. You know, in life, we make decisions all the time, but these decisions, they don't just come randomly. They're connected to our objectives, and our objectives come from a vision, philosophy of life, religion, whatever it might be. And this is true in our personal life, although particularly in personal life, we tend not to make these objectives explicit. They tend to be just assumed or inherited in some way, absorbed. In companies and organizations, the places where we work, you also need a vision, objectives, purpose, strategies. These are at the top, usually explicit, but often they're not. And the same applies to countries. Countries have visions. They have objectives. They have a guiding philosophy underpinning the culture. And these are often, or usually, enshrined in the constitution, in cultural practice, in government policy, and so on. So I'd like to talk on this theme. I'd like to talk about Korea, of course. But first, let me sort of introduce myself a little bit and say something about how I got here, who I am. So I've lived in this country for 43 years now. I came as a journalist. I wrote for the Washington Times, which was an American, or still is an American conservative newspaper. And at the same time, I wrote for The Guardian, which is a British liberal newspaper. And I used to send them the same stories. So in those days, in Western countries, there was no difference, no argument about how we looked at Korea, North Korea and South Korea, between liberal and conservative. There is now, but there wasn't then. I also worked for the Times of London for a while. And in those days, British correspondents who were ambitious and who covered Asia tended to be based in Hong Kong. And the Americans were in Tokyo. So there weren't many of us here, many expat journalists. But I decided to stay, and it's because I sort of fell in love with this country. It seemed, I don't know how to explain it very well, but it seemed to me very soon after I arrived as if this country was sort of touched by God in some way. There was a kind of special, huge energy and a special sort of destiny of some kind, and I felt I wanted to be part of that. I say I fell in love with Korea and Korean people. You know, the experts on relationships will tell you that when you fall in love, you think you're falling in love because somebody's beautiful or they're rich or something. But you actually fall in love because they make you feel better about yourself. You want to think about that. And that changed how I started dating people when I learned that. And Korea made me feel purposeful. I found myself walking here in the street twice as fast as when I was in London. The Koreans had suffered immensely in the 20th century, as we all know. And were determined never to be poor again. They were determined, even though they argued about it, they were determined to be a democracy, to become an advanced nation. And this sort of purposeful spirit infected me, you know. And then I went to North Korea. I had an opportunity to go, and it showed me the other side of the Korean story. I went first pretending to be a tourist who lived in Hong Kong, but after a while, it was 1989, I went every year after that, and then officially as a journalist. And in 1994, you may have seen the picture up there earlier, I was in a group, I was one of 7 reporters in a delegation of about 20 people who we had a long meeting and a lunch with Kim Il-sung. And people have asked me after that, well, what was he like? Did he have horns on his head? What was this man like? He was actually, first thing that struck me sitting there was he's living in the past. And I only later realized this is a kind of dictatorship thing or a tyranny thing. It's you justify your rule with reference to history. At the same time, he was very gracious. So he was asked a question about something, and he would refer to the Japanese occupation. But he very politely apologized to the 3 Japanese journalists in our group for bringing it up. And he did the same with the Americans with reference to the Korean War. And I could see his kind of diplomatic charm working with people. He also unexpectedly had a bit of a sense of humor. He was asked a question, what do you do for leisure? You're sort of an elderly man now, what do you do? And he said, well, when I was young, I used to fish and hunt. I used to hunt bear. And he said, in fact, I still hunt bear, but I'm a bit old now and I can't move so quickly. But I go to this place on the East Coast where there's a lot of bears. But he said, I know. I don't tell them I know, but I know the soldiers, they raise these tame bears. And then they stand behind a tree with a bear, and when they see me coming along, they push the bear out, and I shoot it, And his audience loved this. Again, I could see his sort of magic working. The North Koreans here will be interested to know how he explained his Juche philosophy. Juche, as you know, is his philosophical and intellectual contribution to Marxist-Leninism. And he was asked a question about it. And he said, well, it's like if I'm being asked to accept something foreign, like food, I'll taste it. If it's nice, I'll swallow it. If it's not, I'll spit it out. That was it. That was Juche philosophy. And I bet you the North Koreans who are here have studied it more deeply than he did himself. Anyway, that experience for me in North Korea sort of made me want to change from journalism, which was sort of reporting, it's like looking in through a window at something and reporting, to consulting, which is like being inside. I don't know if there's a better way to explain that, but it made me, I had an opportunity, so I changed jobs. And I got interesting clients, the most interesting of which was Coca-Cola. Now, Coca-Cola, as you know, is one of these countries that's everywhere in the world. But by American law, at that time, it was banned from 4 countries, one of which was North Korea. So under American law, it was illegal for Coca-Cola to be sold in North Korea. And the North Koreans were unfamiliar with it. Took some Coke people on a trip just to have a look. We went into a sort of cafe drinks place in the center of Pyongyang, and we asked for Coca-Cola, and we asked our annewon, our guide, to be quiet. Don't say anything, because we're testing. And the waitress came back with hot chocolate. So they never heard of Coca-Cola, didn't know what it was, exactly. So that was very interesting. What I would say, getting back to our theme, journalism for me was it made me think very tactically. My newspapers may have had philosophy and objectives and all of that. All the news that's fit to print or whatever it is. But to the reporter on the ground, these seem just like slogans and things. You're busy finding a story, writing it up and sending it. At the end of the day, the job's done, you start again the next day. Consulting is a different occupation because you have to be able to advise companies, to advise people on what to do, you have to understand the objectives, often when they can't express them themselves very well. So it brought me into this world of sort of strategic thinking. So let's come back to Korea. Korea's vision. As you know, or some of you might not realize, this is a divided people, north-south. From the moment of division, the sort of separation in 1945 and then the formal division in 1948, the two countries have made their prime national objective to reunify. We all know this. I'm not telling you something you don't know. But here's the question. Why hasn't it happened? Now, there's political explanations. We can blame Kim Il-sung. There's all sorts of explanations. But I'd like to suggest three things for us to think about. Because I want to propose a change of vision. And here's three things to think about. One is it hasn't happened because of conflicting national values. The values in North Korea are the values of race-based nationalism and the supreme authority of the leader and obedience to the leader. The values in South Korea are different. I like to ask South Koreans, what are your national values? And these are one of those questions you sort of think, oh, what was I taught at school, you know? Older people here might think our national values are Confucian, you know, respect for elders, filial piety. But I'm sorry, that's been thrown out of the window. Our modern values here are the values of a democracy. Human rights, freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of association, freedom of expression, justice, rule of law, and so on. These are our values. Now, these two countries can coexist. They can come to some reconciliation and agreement, but they can't become one. And that leads to the second thing to think about, and that is that unification is what we call in English a zero-sum game. That means one side's going to win and the other side's going to lose. Unification, despite our sort of fantasies that we have of some kind of magical merger, one side's going to win and one side's going to lose. Now, what that means, another way of saying that, is that unification is a hostile takeover proposal. It's an aggressive posture, or it's not aggressive to me. As a South Korean, I think I'm very well-meaning. If I want to suggest to North Korea we unify, that's great for them, which it is. But from their point of view, it's an aggressive proposal, and vice versa. The third thing to think about, why this hasn't happened, is, and this is more recent, is that, as you know, in the last 2 years, the North Koreans have decided they don't want it. Now, we're not quite sure what to make of. We're not really talking much about this because we're not really sure how to interpret this. But think of it from this point of view. If we are a democracy, how can we propose unification and stick by our democratic values to a country that doesn't want to be unified? We can't do it anymore. Unless we want to invade them and take them over, you know? So, as I say, we don't quite know how to interpret what's happening in North Korea about this, but what we can say, and by the way, they've changed their constitution, they've changed all sorts of things, their education. What we can say is that if this continues for a decade or two, there's a new generation growing up, zero desire, zero education about being part of a broken nation. They will see themselves as one people and us as foreigners, you know. So, with this in mind, I would like to propose that South Korea reset its objective and please don't shout at me, but I'm going to suggest we drop unification. Now, by that, I don't mean we give up unification. It's still very important. We still want it. It should still be in our national strategy plan, but it should not be the supreme national objective. Why? It obviously hasn't worked. So what do we put in its place? I think the answer is there staring us in the face and has been for a long time, but let me put it this way. We have to ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to live in? Whether we're unified, whether we're South Korea or what. We want to live in a democratic, free market Korea within a democratic, free market Northeast Asia with human rights and all the good things that go with it. That's what we want. And I suggest that's our vision. If we set that as our vision, this is a democratization as our vision, then we're not going to compromise on it. If we get North Koreans, as we did a few years ago, North Koreans coming over here who may well have been murderers. You remember those two men who maybe had killed the other men in the boat to come over? We're not going to just send them back to keep North Korea happy for our good relationship with Kim Jong-un. We're going to go through due process because they, as individual citizens, have a right to due process. We're going to go through that with them. So we wouldn't compromise on our democratic principles, and South Korea would be in a better position, would be better then at embodying the democratic principles, because these would be the main thing that we stand by. And then the last point I'd like to say is I think we should be, instead of looking at the region we live in and being a little bit afraid of China, and then when somebody says, will China be a democracy one day? I keep saying this, so far I found nobody who agrees with me, but anyway, I'm going to say it. China will be a democracy one day. Why? Because there is no other viable option being presented. There's just resistance to democracy or democracy. And I think we should start articulating that vision. And even asking our Chinese friends, hey, when are you guys going to be a democracy? Instead of just automatically assuming that we're going to have to somehow survive in this bullying, authoritarian-dominated region, we need to think more positively and every opportunity nudge it along. And so as you can see, what I'm suggesting is this isn't some kind of theoretical, oh, let's make a new national vision. This is actually something that immediately goes into practice, and I would say it involves all of you. Thank you.